Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from your own blood, your child, the one you raised with your whole heart. My husband had warned me once about blind trust, but I never imagined the knife would come from inside my own family, sharpened by in-laws and greed. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and if you've ever seen betrayal this deep. I was sitting in the hospital's waiting room, the smell of disinfectant stinging my nose, when my phone rang. I thought it was a routine call. Maybe a neighbor, maybe my sister. But when I picked it up, it was my only son, Daniel. His voice wasn't warm. It wasn't the boy I had once rocked to sleep. It was sharp, cold, final. "Mom," he said, almost bored. "We're leaving tomorrow. Claire and I bought tickets to Asia. We needed the money. So I sold your seaside home. And I drained what was left of Dad's account. Don't call me. This is what's best for us." Click. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Not even a goodbye. For a moment, the whole world blurred. I sat frozen, gripping that cheap plastic chair until my knuckles turned white. My ears rang. The chatter of nurses, the beeping monitors, everything drowned in the echo of his words. I sold your seaside home. 40 years of sweat, sacrifice, and memories, gone in a single sentence. I had built that house with my late husband, Marco. We mixed cement with our own hands. He sanded the wooden beams. I stitched the curtains. Every summer, Daniel had run across those floors with sandy feet, laughing as the ocean breeze filled the rooms. That house wasn't just walls. It was our life. And he sold it like it was nothing more than a line item. I wanted to scream, to break, to collapse right there under the weight of my humiliation. But something inside me shifted. Instead of tears, a strange calm spread through me. It was the same calm I had felt 6 months earlier when I held Marco's lifeless hand after his sudden heart attack. That quiet, heavy silence that doesn't crush you, but steals you. Daniel thought I was weak. Clara thought I was disposable. They believed the widow they had stripped of her last belongings would crumble quietly into the shadows. They were wrong. As I sat there, I remembered something. A detail I had pushed aside, buried under grief. 3 days before Marco died, he had pressed a sealed envelope into my hands. His voice was steady, almost prophetic. "Elena, keep this safe. Don't open it until you're ready. One day, it may protect you from the people closest to you." At the time, I thought he was just being dramatic. A grieving man facing his mortality. I tucked it away into the back of my dresser drawer. And then, between funeral arrangements, condolences, and nights of loneliness, I forgot. Until that moment in the hospital waiting room, I could almost feel the paper between my fingers, hear Marco's steady tone echoing through the fog of my memory. The doctor called my name, snapping me back. I walked into his office, nodding mechanically as he said my health looked stable for my age. Good blood pressure. Heart strong. Eat better, rest more. I smiled politely, but inside a storm brewed. Because health was not the problem. Trust was. Walking out of the clinic, I didn't feel like a fragile widow anymore. I felt like someone holding a secret weapon in her handbag. My son thought he had stripped me of everything, but he had no idea. On the bus ride home, the city blurred past. Shops, hurried strangers, children holding their parents' hands. I wondered how many of them had secrets. How many had been betrayed by the very people they had sacrificed for. I wasn't crying anymore. I was planning. By the time the bus rattled to my stop, the decision was carved into me as clearly as Marco's name on his tombstone. Tonight I would open that envelope. I would face whatever truth Marco had left me. I placed my hand on my chest, whispering to myself, Daniel believes he took everything from me. But what he doesn't know is that Marco always planned ahead. I turned the key in my door, heart pounding. Upstairs in the dresser drawer, the envelope waited, silent, heavy, promising answers I wasn't sure I was ready for. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling as I reached for the handle. And that's when I realized the real story was only just beginning. The envelope felt heavier than it should, just paper. Yet it burned in my hands like a stone pulled from fire. I carried it to my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed Marco and I had shared for 40 years, and slowly opened the flap. Inside were several folded documents, neat as always, and at the very top, in his handwriting, a short line. "Elena, if you're reading this, it means my fears were right." My chest tightened. The first document was a property deed, not for the seaside home, but for 3 other apartments across town. Each bore Marco's name and each was still active. The second was a statement from a savings account, numbers so large I blinked twice. And tucked in the back, a letter in his steady script. He had written, "Don't trust appearances. And don't trust everyone who smiles at you, Elena, especially Clara. Clara, my daughter-in-law, my son's wife, the woman who had slipped her manicured hand into our family the way a vine coils around a tree trunk, slow, quiet, choking without being noticed." I set the papers down and exhaled. I thought back to the day Marco first pulled me aside after dinner. Daniel and Clara had just left, still laughing about some investment project. Marco whispered, "She sees you as an obstacle, not a mother. Watch her." I'd waved him off, embarrassed by his suspicion. Clara was attentive, cheerful, always offering to help in the kitchen. But now I saw it. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, images flooded me. Clara's tight smile, her expensive dresses, the way Daniel's opinions started sounding more like hers than his. And now he had sold my house, drained my husband's account. But was it truly Daniel's idea? Or Clara's whisper in his ear? By morning, exhaustion and anger had hardened into resolve. I brewed coffee, the smell filling the kitchen, and opened a drawer. Inside lay the spare keys to Marco's old truck, the one Daniel had promised to look after. I walked outside, keys in hand, but the driveway was empty. The truck was gone. I called Daniel. Straight to voicemail. I tried again, my hands trembling. Finally, on the third attempt, his voice answered, casual, irritated. "Mom, stop calling. Clara sold the truck last week. We needed cash for the flights." Sold just like that. His father's pride, his Sunday ritual, every polish of chrome, all gone. My throat closed as he spoke on. "Don't be dramatic. It was old anyway. Clara found a buyer. We'll send you something from overseas once we're settled." I couldn't speak. Couldn't even breathe. My son's voice, once the sound of my joy, now sounded like poison dripping down the line. When I hung up, I stood at the window, watching neighbors walk by. Mrs. Torres waved kindly, as if nothing in the world was wrong. And yet, in that moment, I felt utterly exposed, stripped, humiliated. The whole neighborhood would soon know. Elena, the widow, abandoned by her only child, even her truck gone. The humiliation burned deeper than the loss itself. By noon, I couldn't take the walls of the house anymore. I walked to the little cafe at the corner, sat by the window and ordered tea. Behind me, 2 women chatted in hushed tones. I caught Clara's name. My heart jumped. "Always thought she married him for love," one said. "No," the other replied, lowering her voice. "She told my cousin once she wanted that seaside house. Said it would be their first step to real wealth." Imagine plotting that while the father was still alive. I froze, my blood ran cold. So Marco had been right all along. Clara's ambition wasn't sudden, it was years in the making. I left the cafe before the tea even cooled, my steps fast, my pulse louder than the traffic. Back home, I spread Marco's documents across the bed. My fingers traced his neat handwriting. Every line, every number, every warning. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I was the keeper of a secret Clara could never suspect. Because Daniel might think he and his wife had taken everything from me. But in truth, what they sold illegally was only a fraction of what Marco had left behind. I stared at the deeds, the statements, the warnings, and whispered into the still air. They believe I'm powerless. But soon, they'll learn whose hands really hold this family's future. The papers lay across my bed like scattered pieces of a puzzle Marco had designed for me to solve. His handwriting, calm and deliberate, seemed to whisper from the past. Don't trust appearances. I spent that entire afternoon going through each document, one by one. There were deeds to properties I had never set foot in. Small apartments tucked into corners of the city, a shopfront in the old district, even a modest motel on the coast. My pulse quickened with every new address. Marco, a simple man who drove buses for 40 years, had been building a quiet empire under my very nose. The bank statements were worse, numbers so large they almost looked unreal. My hands trembled, the paper crackling as I read line after line. My husband, who had once argued with me over the cost of a new washing machine, had hidden away investments worth more than I ever imagined. Why hadn't he told me? The answer came in his letter. Elena, I kept this from you not out of mistrust, but protection. I knew Clara's eyes were always on our pockets. I wanted her to believe we were modest people, living simple lives. If she knew the truth, she would poison Daniel with greed, and we would lose him. I pressed the letter to my chest. Marco had been right. Clara had poisoned him anyway. That night I couldn't eat. The clock ticked past midnight, shadows stretching across the walls as I sat surrounded by documents. Outside, the street was quiet except for the hum of a lone car passing by. Inside, I was learning that everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my security, was incomplete. Marco hadn't just left me memories. He had left me power. And Daniel, my only son, had sold what wasn't his to sell. The seaside home, Marco wrote, was always under my name. Clara and Daniel had no legal right to touch it. Their so-called sale was fraud, plain and simple. I sat straighter, my heart thudding. Fraud. A crime. Suddenly, the humiliation I had felt earlier began to shift into something sharper. Not only had they betrayed me, they had exposed themselves to consequences they couldn't even imagine. The next morning, I called the one person Marco had trusted with our legal affairs, Mr. Ramos, the family lawyer. He had been at the funeral, a quiet man with kind eyes. My voice shook slightly as I explained what I had found. He asked me to bring everything to his office that afternoon. I dressed carefully, not in morning black, but in a pale blouse Marco used to love. I wanted to feel his presence with me. With the manila envelope tucked under my arm, I took the bus downtown. Mr. Ramos spread the papers across his desk, his brow tightening as he read. Señora Elena, this changes everything. You are the rightful owner of all these properties. And yes, the sale of the seaside home is invalid. Your son had no legal claim. I felt my throat tighten. Can I get it back? Yes, it will take some work, but I can nullify the transaction. And more. You also control the building where your son and Clara live. Did you know that? The room tilted slightly. My fingers clutched the armrest of the chair. That building. Mine? He nodded. Through a holding company Marco established 10 years ago. He placed everything in it, shares, real estate. You are the sole heir. The air seemed thinner, harder to breathe. They thought I was a helpless widow, when in truth I was their landlord. Walking home after the meeting, the city felt different. Brighter somehow, yet dangerous. I noticed every shop window, every hurried conversation, as if I were seeing the world from behind a mask no one else knew I wore. Back in my room, I laid the documents out again. They no longer looked like papers. They looked like weapons. For the first time in weeks, I felt my lips curve into a smile. Not a smile of joy, but of certainty. Daniel and Clara believed they had stripped me bare. But in reality, I held the very ground beneath their feet. I whispered into the empty room, my voice steady. They wanted me powerless. Instead, they've given me the perfect chance to decide. Do I punish them in silence? Or do I let them see exactly who they tried to destroy? That night I didn't sleep. The papers stayed spread across my table like soldiers ready for battle. By dawn, the decision was made. I would not reveal my hand, not yet. If Daniel and Clara saw my strength too soon, they would find a way to twist it, to play the victims. No, I would let them believe their lie, that I was broken, alone, poor. The following morning, I rehearsed my mask. Black cardigan, simple skirt, hair pulled back. I left the house slowly, as if weighed down by grief. On the street, neighbors watched with sympathy. Poor Elena, Mrs. Torres murmured as I passed. Her son left her with nothing. I forced a faint smile, let my shoulders slump, and walked on. Inside, though, I was burning. By mid-morning, I was at Mr. Ramos's office. He greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes that told me he already knew the path I was walking. We spoke for nearly 2 hours, going through each property, each account. He confirmed what Marco's letter had said. I owned more than Daniel or Clara could imagine. And the seaside house? They never had the right to sell it. "We can move to nullify the sale immediately," Mr. Ramos explained, sliding documents across the desk. "The buyers will get their money back, and the property returns to you, quietly." "Quietly?" I repeated. That's how it must be. Because secrecy was my greatest weapon now, the next days became a performance. In public, I was the grieving widow, carrying groceries in a worn bag, nodding politely as neighbors pitied me. At night, behind closed doors, I became someone else entirely. A strategist, a silent queen on a chessboard only I could see. I learned that Daniel and Clara had been reckless. They sold the house below market price, desperate for quick cash. They drained accounts that barely scratched the surface of Marco's hidden wealth. And worse, they carried debts they could never repay. Loans taken in Daniel's name, credit cards maxed out by Clara's endless shopping sprees. Every time I thought about it, I felt a bitter twist in my chest. Not just at their betrayal, but at their blindness. They had traded gold for dust. One afternoon, as I walked to the bakery, I overheard 2 men talking outside the corner store. "Did you hear?" one said. "That business Daniel bragged about in Singapore collapsed. Lost everything." I froze. My heart kicked against my ribs. So that was why they had rushed the sale. Their big gamble abroad had failed before it even began. I walked home slowly, my bread tucked under my arm, thinking of Clara's smug smile, her certainty that she was climbing into a life of luxury. Instead, she had dragged my son into ruin. That evening, I called Mr. Ramos again. "Recover the seaside house," I told him, "and start the paperwork on the apartment building. I want control transferred directly to my name." He hesitated. "Do you want your son notified?" "No," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Not yet. I want them to live their fantasy a little longer, believing they've left me destitute." When I hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The performance, I realized, was almost as exhausting as the betrayal. But it was necessary. Every pitiful glance from neighbors, every whispered rumor in the street, it all added to the disguise. Because the truth was mine alone. Late that night, I stood at the window staring at the streetlight pooling gold onto the empty road. Somewhere, Daniel and Clara were laughing, thinking they had won. But their world was built on sand, and I was holding the tide. I whispered into the quiet house, almost to Marco. "They think I am powerless. But soon, very soon, they will come crawling back, and when they do, what kind of mother will they find? The broken woman they abandoned, or the landlady who owns the ground beneath their feet?" The weeks passed slowly, each one sharpening my patience. I waited quietly behind my mask of fragility. Every day I imagined the same scene, Daniel and Clara returning, not as conquerors, but as beggars. And then one gray afternoon it happened. I was watering the small geraniums on my porch when I saw them coming down the street. Their luggage dragged behind them, wheels scraping the uneven pavement. Daniel's shoulders slumped, his once confident stride now broken. Clara walked ahead, sunglasses covering her eyes even though the sky was heavy with clouds. She clutched her designer bag like a shield, though I could see the straps were frayed. They didn't look like a couple returning from an adventure. They looked like 2 soldiers crawling back from a lost war. I froze, the watering can trembling in my hands. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Whispers carried across fences. The prodigal son was home, but not in glory. Daniel spotted me first. His face crumpled as if he were a child again. "Mom?" His voice cracked, filled with desperation. We need help." I wanted to run to him, to hold him like I had when he was small. But then Clara's sharp voice cut through. "Elena, you need to understand, this isn't our fault." The market crashed. The people abroad were dishonest. We were misled. Not a word of apology, not even a flicker of humility. Just excuses, always excuses. I set the watering can down. "Come inside," I said softly. Inside, the house felt tense, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his hands twisting together. Clara stood by the counter, arms crossed, her chin raised high, scanning my home like it was beneath her. "We're broke," Daniel admitted finally. "The business failed. We lost the money, the contacts, everything. We don't even have a place to stay." His eyes glistened with tears. Clara rolled her eyes. "You're making it sound worse than it is. We just need a temporary arrangement until we get back on our feet." A temporary arrangement. I almost laughed. They thought they could waltz back into my life after selling my home, my truck, my dignity, and demand shelter. Still, I kept my mask on. I tilted my head, let my voice tremble just slightly. "Of course. You can stay here, for now." Daniel sagged in relief. Clara, however, didn't bother with gratitude. She brushed dust off her blouse and muttered, "At least we won't have to hear gossip from the neighbors in this old place." Her words cut deep, but I swallowed the pain. Let her think she was above me. She had no idea how far she had already fallen. That evening, as they unpacked in the spare room, I overheard them through the thin wall. "Daniel, we need to be careful with Mom. She looks weaker than ever." "Clara, weak? She's a burden. If she can't even manage herself, maybe we should consider a nursing facility later." Less trouble. A nursing facility. For me, after everything. I sat alone in the darkened living room, listening to their muffled voices, my hands clasped so tightly my nails dug into my palms. They still thought I was powerless. They still believed I had nothing left but them. They had no idea that the roof above their heads, the bed they slept on, the very walls surrounding them, were mine, legally mine, paid for with Marco's foresight. I leaned back in the chair, the shadows wrapping around me like armor. Daniel's desperation, Clara's arrogance, they would collide soon enough. And I would be ready. The only question left was simple, chilling, and heavy on my tongue. When the moment comes, will I show them mercy? Or will I let them drown in the ruin they created? The nights were the hardest. Their whispers slipped through the thin walls, clawing at my thoughts long after the house had gone quiet. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to them argue. Daniel's voice low, strained. Clara's sharp, bitter, each word slicing into the dark. By the second week, the mask I wore was second nature. In front of them, I shuffled around like a frail widow, forgetful, tired, meek. But in truth, I was sharper than ever, observing every crack forming between them. Daniel tried to work. I watched him leave early in the mornings, his shoulders hunched under the weight of shame. He came home late, his clothes smelling of sweat and engine oil. He had found odd jobs at the mechanic's garage, sweeping floors, fetching tools. The man who once dreamed of overseas empires was now being barked at by boys half his age. Clara refused to follow. She stayed home, draped across the sofa, scrolling endlessly on her cracked phone screen. Her nails, once manicured, were chipped. She sold her jewelry piece by piece, each sale disguised as a temporary measure. But even then, she insisted on walking through the neighborhood in heels, pretending nothing had changed. Her pride was a mask too, but unlike mine, it was crumbling. I said nothing. I just watched. One evening, as I cleared the dinner table, their voices rose again behind the closed door of their room. "You said we'd be rich," Clara hissed. "You said selling that stupid house would set us free." Daniel's reply was broken, desperate. "I thought it would. I thought Singapore was a sure thing." "You pushed me into it!" I stopped with a plate in my hand, listening. "Don't you dare blame me," Clara spat. "If your father had left more behind, we wouldn't be in this mess. Your mother is sitting on nothing." "Nothing." The plate shook in my hands. She had no idea. The next morning, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, his face pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. His voice cracked as he admitted what I already suspected. "Mom," he said, barely audible, "I signed papers. Loans, in your name." Clara said it was just a formality. They needed collateral. "I forged your signature." My stomach twisted. My son, my own flesh. had written me into debts I never agreed to. I let my hand tremble against my teacup.
You, what?
He lowered his head into his hands. I had no choice. We were drowning. I thought I could pay it back before you ever knew. I said nothing. On the surface, I let my lips quiver, my voice falter as if I were devastated, but inside the storm steadied. I already had the evidence of Marco's holdings. I already knew the law was on my side. And now I had his confession. Later that afternoon, I slipped into my room and dialed Mr. Ramos. In a low voice, I explained everything: Daniel's forged signature, the false debts, Clara's manipulation. Ramos sighed heavily on the other end. He's exposed himself legally, Senora. If the banks press charges, it will be serious. I don't want him in prison, I whispered. Not yet. I just need to know how far they've fallen. That night, as I passed their room, I heard Clara's fury. You're pathetic, she sneered. Working like a laborer, begging your mother for food. You promised me wealth, Daniel. Instead, you've chained me to this miserable life. Her words were venom, dripping with contempt. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening to the silence that followed. Then faintly Daniel's sobs. My son, the boy I once cradled in my arms, reduced to tears in the darkness. I stepped away quietly, my heart torn in two directions. One part still a mother aching for her child. The other part cold, calculating, already holding the threads of their ruin. As I closed my bedroom door, one thought echoed louder than the rest, chilling me to the bone. How much longer can I pretend to be powerless before I finally show them the truth? The question kept echoing in my head. How much longer can I pretend? By the end of that week, I had my answer. No longer. Daniel's confession about the forged loans was the final straw. My silence had protected him long enough. Now it was time for the truth to step into the light, calmly, coldly, and on my terms. The following Monday, I asked them both to come with me to Mr. Ramos's office. I said it softly, my voice weak as though I needed their help with paperwork. Clara sighed, rolling her eyes, but she agreed. Daniel, worn down by guilt, didn't protest. At 10 a.m., we arrived. The office smelled of polished wood and old books. Mr. Ramos stood as we entered, his expression unreadable. I took the chair closest to his desk, while Daniel and Clara sat opposite side by side, though their bodies were tense, leaning away from one another. Ramos began without delay. He placed a folder on the table, his hands firm. Senor Daniel, he said evenly, we need to discuss some very serious matters. We have evidence of forged documents. Loans signed under your mother's name without her consent. That is fraud punishable by prison. Daniel's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came out. Clara stiffened, her jaw tight. Ramos continued, sliding copies of the papers toward them. Here is your signature. Here are the bank filings. If the lenders decide to press charges, there will be little we can do to protect you. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, Daniel stammered, I didn't mean... I thought I could fix it before she found out. Clara's hand shot out, gripping his arm, not in comfort, but in warning. Don't admit anything, she hissed under her breath. But Ramos wasn't finished. He opened a second folder and turned to me. And now, Senora Elena, it is time they see the truth. He spread out documents I had hidden for weeks, property deeds, company shares, bank statements. Clara's eyes widened, then narrowed, scanning the numbers, the signatures, the official stamps. This can't be real, she whispered. Ramos adjusted his glasses. It is very real. Your mother-in-law is the sole heir of Marco's holdings. She owns the seaside home, the apartment building you live in, and multiple accounts. Everything you assumed was gone belongs to her. The room tilted with their silence. Daniel turned to me, his eyes glistening with shame. Mom, all this time? I met his gaze steadily. My heart trembled, but my voice did not. Yes, all this time. I let you believe I was broken so you could taste the poverty you forced on me. Clara slammed her palm on the desk, her mask cracking. You planned this. You let us suffer while you sat on all this money? I turned to her slowly, my voice cold as steel. No, Clara, I didn't let you suffer. You did that yourself, through greed, through lies, through the poison you poured into my son's ear. Daniel buried his face in his hands, whispering, "What have I done?" The air grew heavier, charged with every unsaid word. Clara's eyes darted to the door, then back to me, blazing with fury. "If I go down," she spat, rising from her chair, "I'll drag you both with me. Don't think this ends here, Elena. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Her voice echoed through the office, venomous and final. She stormed out, her heels striking the polished floor like gunshots. Daniel remained slumped in his chair, broken, torn between shame and fear. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the door she had slammed behind her. My calm was a mask, but inside a question churned like fire. Has Clara truly lost? Or has she just declared the next battle? The echo of Clara's heels lingered long after she stormed out of Ramos's office. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Daniel sat beside me, his shoulders trembling, his hands still covering his face. I didn't speak. I wanted him to sit with the truth, to feel the weight of what his choices, and hers, had cost him. When we finally stepped outside, the sky had turned dark with storm clouds. Rain threatened but held itself back, like the world was waiting for something to break. Clara was nowhere to be seen. Her luggage, once dragged into my home with pride, had already disappeared. By evening, she was gone for good. Daniel paced the living room, his face pale. "She's not answering my calls." She blocked me. His voice cracked. "Mom, she took the last of the cash we had. She's gone." I sat in my chair, hands folded in my lap. A part of me pitied him, the boy I once tucked into bed, who now stood before me hollowed out by betrayal. But another part of me whispered that this was the very lesson Marco had warned me about. 2 days later, the whispers reached the neighborhood. Clara hadn't just left. She had left with another man. Some said a businessman she met abroad. Others claimed an old lover she had kept hidden. Either way, the truth was the same. She had abandoned Daniel at his lowest. And yet, despite everything, Daniel still defended her. "She was under pressure," he murmured one night at the table. She couldn't handle it." His eyes were wet, red-rimmed. "I drove her away." His voice broke something inside me. He still didn't see. He still didn't understand how deep her manipulation ran. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "No, Daniel. She was never yours to lose. She only ever wanted what you could give her. And when it was gone, so was she." He didn't answer. He only lowered his head, tears dripping onto the table. In the days that followed, Daniel tried to rebuild. He found steady work at the mechanics shop, cleaning engines, sweeping floors. I watched him leave each morning with his lunch in a paper bag, the arrogance stripped from his step. Neighbors whispered when they saw him. Once he had been the man boasting about overseas business ventures. Now he was the son who had betrayed his mother, abandoned by his wife, humbled into labor. And still, he came home every evening to my table, to my food, to my roof, the same roof he had once tried to sell out from under me. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Daniel broke the silence. His voice was low, almost childlike. "Mom, can you ever forgive me?" I set my fork down, studying his face. He looked older, worn, fragile. Not the man who betrayed me, but the boy who once ran across the sand at the seaside house, laughing as Marco carried him on his shoulders. "I don't know if forgiveness is mine to give," I said softly. "You broke something that doesn't mend overnight. But you are my son, and as long as you're willing to work, you'll have shelter here." His shoulders sagged, relief and grief tangled together. He nodded, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. In that moment, I felt the strange ache of two truths colliding inside me. I was both the mother who wanted to shield her child and the woman who had been betrayed beyond measure. As night settled, I walked to the window and stared into the distance. My eyes followed the road that led to the seaside home, the house Marco and I had built with our bare hands. It was mine again, waiting for me. A symbol of everything I had lost, and everything I had reclaimed. And I knew soon I would have to decide, do I let my son rebuild quietly by my side? Or do I return to that house and begin a new life without him? The night I asked myself that question, whether to rebuild with Daniel by my side or return alone to the seaside house, I already knew the answer. The house was waiting. And so was the life Marco and I had dreamed of, untouched by greed, guarded by his foresight. A week later, I packed a single suitcase. Daniel helped me load it into the car, his hands rough from work, his face thinner than before. He didn't complain, didn't argue. He only said, "If you need me, I'll be here." For the first time in years, he sounded like my son again, not Clara's echo. When I turned the key in the door of the seaside home, my breath caught. The scent of salt and wood still clung to the walls. Dust lay thick on the windowsills, but the bones of the house were strong. My hand lingered on the frame of the doorway, remembering Marco's laughter, Daniel's small feet racing down the hall. Memories didn't vanish just because someone tried to sell them. They lived here waiting for me to come back. In the weeks that followed, I began to restore it. Fresh paint, new curtains, small repairs. Neighbors stopped by, surprised to see me reclaim what everyone believed was gone. Their whispers changed. Pity turned into admiration. One afternoon, as I scrubbed the porch rail, Mrs. Torres leaned over the fence. "Elena," she said, her voice warm, "I always thought you were broken after Marco died. But look at you now. Stronger than before." Her words filled me with quiet pride. Not because I sought recognition, but because strength had finally replaced shame. Meanwhile, Clara's downfall unfolded like a storm across the neighborhood. The man she had left with abandoned her just as quickly. Rumors spread of debts unpaid, creditors chasing her from one town to another. The same woman who once strutted through the streets in designer heels was now whispered about with pity and scorn. And Daniel? He stayed behind, working at the garage, earning his own money for the first time without Clara's influence. Sometimes he visited me on weekends, carrying groceries, fixing things around the house. Each time he apologized again, not with grand speeches, but with small acts of humility. One evening, as the sun sank behind the sea, he stood on the porch with me. His voice was quiet, almost broken. "I don't deserve forgiveness, Mom, but I'm going to keep trying until I earn it." I looked at him, the son who had betrayed me, who had been blinded by love and greed, who had lost everything and crawled back. And those scars still burned in my heart. I saw something new in his eyes. Regret. Honesty. A flicker of the boy I had raised. I nodded. "Then keep trying, Daniel. That's all a man can do." That night, I sat alone in the living room, the sound of the waves rolling through the open windows. For the first time in months, I felt peace. I had been betrayed by the people closest to me. I had been stripped of dignity, humiliated, left for nothing. But I hadn't broken. Marco had given me more than hidden wealth. He had given me the wisdom to rise when others tried to push me down. He had given me the chance to stand tall, to reclaim what was mine, and to teach my son a lesson no money could buy. Clara's name was now spoken only with scorn, her greed consuming her in ways she never expected. That was her punishment, not from me, but from life itself. And as for me, I was no longer the widow abandoned in silence. I was the woman who carried betrayal in her chest and turned it into strength. The victim who became a fighter. The fighter who became free. I closed my eyes, breathing in the salt air, and whispered to Marco's memory, "We built this life together, and even in death you protected me. Thank you." This was my story, and if you've ever felt betrayal this deep, know you're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.